Have you ever been thirsty for something simple like respect and felt invisible instead? Have you ever been told to wait while others were served right in front of you on a quiet morning at 32,000 feet? A single glass of water becomes a mirror. In that reflection, we see a black executive traveling in first class, a veteran flight attendant with 10 years of habits, and a cabin full of eyes deciding whether to notice or to look away. No shouting, no spectacle, just a small refusal that lands like a stone in the chest. Here is the crossroads. When dignity is nicked by a tiny cut, what do you do? Do you swallow it to keep the peace? Do you confront it and risk being labeled difficult? Or do you turn the moment into something larger than yourself? Imagine it is you. Your call light is on. Your mouth is dry. You watch another drink tray roll by. People shift in their seats. Someone pretends to read. You feel the old ache of being misread. Do you let it pass? Or do you ask the question that reveals the truth we all live with, who counts as a priority person and who does not? This is not a story about rage. It is a story about choice, about a leader who refuses to humiliate and instead chooses to teach, about a woman who discovers how a habit can harden into bias, about witnesses who stop being silent, and about how one glass of water can change an airline and maybe the way we look at each other. If you have ever felt overlooked or unsure whether to speak, this journey is for you. Come listen, remember, and decide what you would do at 32,000 feet. If the message speaks to you, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can see and learn. Now, let us begin. The engine hummed steadily, as smooth as the breath of the sky. No one said anything. There was only the slight vibration of metal and the whistling of the wind outside the plane, mixed with the soft breathing of a few sleeping passengers. In row 2A, the black man sat silently. He didn't read the newspaper, didn't open his laptop, and didn't listen to music. He just looked out the oval window where the morning sunlight was reflecting off the fluffy white clouds, as if the sky had just been polished. It was a flight from Atlanta to Seattle, lasting nearly 4.5 hours. The first-class cabin had just 8 seats, bright cream leather, small fold-out tables, and shiny beverage trays. Everything exuded the luxury that commercial travelers are accustomed to. But today, in the midst of that peaceful atmosphere, there was something strange, quiet, slightly tense, like a thin string suspended in the air, waiting to vibrate at the slightest touch. The man's name was Marcus Ellington. He was about 45 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and had a deep brown complexion. His face had the calm of a man of experience, the kind of calm that makes others pause without understanding why. In his hand, he held a worn leather notebook with an old cover and slightly curved edges. He had written a few lines in blue ink, his handwriting neat and sure. No one in the cabin knew that the man sitting there was the CEO of Sky Vista Airlines, the very airline they were flying. He usually avoided flights operated by his company, unless he wanted to check in quietly, like a regular passenger. No suit, no badge, no secretary, just a simple man, with an old watch and a gentle smile as he greeted the gate staff. The head stewardess, Clara Hughes, was the first to greet him. Her smile was quick, short, and formulaic. "Good morning, sir." Her voice was even and professional. Marcus nodded, "Good morning," and walked past, dragging his small suitcase into the cabin. When he sat down, Clara glanced over, just a glance, but enough to make her gaze shift slightly, She was used to seeing businessmen in dark suits, shiny watches, new laptops. This man was different, too casual. She automatically classified him as first-class upgrade. The feeling isn't bad, it's not obvious, just a small, unconscious prejudice, but it's there, creeping in like dust in the air. Marcus paid no attention. He remained calm, opened his notebook, and wrote a few lines. First observation people respond faster to looks than to words. He smiled slightly. Taking notes was a lifelong habit, the habit of someone who had worked his way up from the bottom. He had started his career not in an office, but underground on the loading dock, where his hands had been tanned by the sun and the smell of engine oil. He knew what it was like to be judged by appearance, and he knew that small prejudices were sometimes the root of big problems. Another young flight attendant, Lena Tran, a Vietnamese American, was arranging the food trays. She looked at Marcus and smiled slightly. He returned the gesture with a warm nod. It was a simple nod, but it conveyed something that is rare in modern aviation silent respect. As the sunlight filtered through the clouds and into the cabin, Lena suddenly noticed that there was something very peaceful about his expression. It was as if he was observing not only the world outside, but also the world within people. No one knew that just a few hours later, this quiet flight would become the center of attention of the entire aviation industry. Just because of a glass of water. A glass of water, and how a person chooses to react when treated unfairly. Marcus gently closed the book, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. Outside, the sunlight was still bright. The plane continued to fly, and fate was silently flying towards them. Seat 2A was next to the window, next to the aisle. From there, Marcus Ellington could see almost the entire first-class cabin. The morning light filtered through the window, casting long streaks on the floor, and fell on his old brown leather shoes. They no longer had a new shine, but they had been carefully polished, every crease meticulously done. He closed his notebook, put his pen on the table, and looked around. The other passengers were busy, a middle-aged man reading a business magazine, a woman in a black suit adjusting her hair in a small mirror, a young couple fighting over a headset. Everything looked normal, but Marcus was still silently observing every little detail, a hard habit to break for a leader accustomed to seeing the whole system operate through seemingly meaningless details. How people behave in small situations often speaks louder than any evaluation report, he once said in a staff training session, and today he intended to do just that: observe, take notes, and better understand how the team serves passengers. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his notes. Under actual flights, he had nearly 20 different entries. Each entry was a trip he took in secret, without notice, without privileges, without an assistant, just a regular passenger, paying for a ticket like everyone else. He believed that only when he stepped down into that row, sitting in the same space as real customers, would he understand what needed to change. Marcus doesn't like noise. He doesn't like the spotlight. He's always believed that silence is a power, the power to make others look back, not bow their heads. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back on the chair, and thought back to the years gone by. As a child in suburban Georgia, he had helped his mother wash dishes in a small diner. The owner, a middle-aged white woman, often called him by another name, boy. He remembered clearly the first time he asked, "Can I call you by your first name?" She just smiled. "Of course, but you need to work faster." Marcus. From that day on, he realized one thing: people only remember your name when they respect you. And respect is something you have to earn. As a student, Marcus studied finance but worked at the airport to pay his tuition. His first job was loading and unloading cargo in the technical area, a place where no one cared who you were, as long as you could lift a box weighing nearly 80 pounds without complaining. In the summer, the warehouse was hot enough to melt your shoes. In the winter, the wind was icy. But Marcus didn't give up. He remembers his first assignment as a ground crew member. He was in his new uniform, standing in the sun, watching the giant planes take off. "We'll never get to sit there," one of his colleagues said. Marcus just smiled. "I don't want to just sit there. I want to make them fly better." 20 years later, he did just that. Becoming the CEO of Sky Vista Airlines was not by luck, but because he never forgot the days standing in the wind, watching others board the plane. He understood the feeling of being judged, doubted, and questioned just because of the color of his skin or the way he dressed. And because he understood, he chose to act differently. The plane shuddered as it turned, jolting Marcus back to reality. He opened his eyes and reached for his seatbelt. The chief stewardess, Clara Hughes, was passing by, her perfume wafting in the air, a woody scent with a hint of citrus. He nodded, but she only smiled mechanically. A passenger across the street raised his hand and called out to Clara, who immediately turned around, her smile instantly changing, soft, bright, and full of enthusiasm. Marcus watched the scene, the corners of his mouth curling up a little. He wasn't angry. He just made a note in his notebook, a selective reaction, based on personal feelings, not on procedure. He didn't hate her. He didn't hate anyone. Marcus believed that most people weren't bad. They were just blind to what they didn't see. Lena Tran stepped forward and placed the tray of snacks on the table in the middle of the aisle. She bowed her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll be back in a few minutes with some drinks." Her voice was soft, with a Western accent mixed with Asian accent. Marcus chuckled. "Thank you. No rush." The way he spoke made Lena sense something different. Not the usual authoritarian kind, but a calmness that made others want to do better. He opened his phone and read his emails. Hundreds of unanswered messages, mostly from the board of directors people who were always busy talking about revenue and profits. But Marcus knew that the true value of an airline was not in the numbers, but in the experience of each person sitting in this cabin. An elderly customer sitting in the back row suddenly coughed. Lena rushed over, handing him tissues and water. Clara stood nearby, glanced over, then continued chatting with the customer wearing a gold watch in seat 1B. Marcus observed, adding a line biased service, based on perceived value, not real value. He sighed softly and closed the book. In his eyes, that small bias was not just a personal error, but a sign of a culture that needed to change, a culture that was confusing serving customers with serving class. The little girl sitting in row 3B was looking at him. Her eyes were clear, half curious, half shy. He smiled, and she shyly turned away. That image reminded him of his daughter, Amelia, who had just turned 14 this year. She had asked Dad, "Why do people always look at you like that at the airport?" He hugged her and simply replied, "Because sometimes they are not used to seeing someone like you in that position." The girl nodded, then whispered, "Then I will get used to it. I will tell my friends." Marcus laughed at the memory. The smile softened the atmosphere in the cabin. The young flight attendant passing by also smiled back. Only Clara kept a professional face, showing no emotion. "We're going to experience some light turbulence for the next few minutes," the loudspeaker announced. The plane shook slightly. Some passengers adjusted their seat belts. Marcus tilted his head back, watching the clouds drift by outside the window. Everything was peaceful. No one expected that this peace would be shattered by a small act, a refused glass of water. He looked at his watch and added the last line to his notebook. "The measure of a service culture is not when things go smoothly, but when customers are treated differently. How they react and how employees react, that is the real thing." Marcus closed the notebook. His eyes lit up, reflecting the sunlight through the glass. Clara was walking ahead. She had a tray of drinks in her hand. He smiled slightly. Little did anyone know that the next few minutes would be a turning point, not only for her, but for the entire airline. Clara Hughes pulled the tray of drinks, her high heels clicking rhythmically on the polished cabin floor. She had been doing this job for 10 years, and every movement was instinctive smiling, asking questions, listening, adjusting. For Clara, the plane was a stage, and she knew every move. Since childhood, her mother taught her that how you appear to others determines how they treat you. This saying was ingrained in her mind as a rule of life. When she became a flight attendant, she applied it thoroughly. She believed in passenger class. People who dress politely, speak properly, are the ones who deserve to receive the best service. This morning, as the passenger list appeared on her tablet, she glanced at seat 2A, Marcus Ellington. The name sounded familiar, but she ignored it. Just a regular passenger, she thought. Everything about him was so plain. Crew neck sweater, old leather suitcase, old phone. No hint of him being special. Clara adjusted her scarf and put on a professional smile. She had always prided herself on being able to read a customer in seconds. In her mind, unconscious categories emerged: businessmen, tourists, difficult people, easygoing people, and what she called upgraded passengers. When Marcus entered the cabin, her smile was fleeting as a flash of light. She felt something was off about him. Maybe it was the way he bowed slightly, or the way his eyes were so calm, the kind that made it difficult to determine his status. She reassured herself, as long as you do your job well and follow the rules, nothing can go wrong. But what Clara didn't realize was that the very rules she believed in were built on prejudice. She pushed the drinks tray across the first row. "Good morning, Mr. Collins. Coffee or orange juice?" The white man with the gold watch smiled. "Coffee, please." Clara poured the coffee. Tilting it precisely, smiling evenly, she felt she was in the right place, among the right people. Lena Tran, the young flight attendant, was checking the back cabin. Clara glanced over and remarked softly, "Lena, remember to serve the first-class passengers first. Don't mistake them for the economy cabin." Lena nodded, seeming a little hesitant, but said nothing. Clara turned back to seat 2A. Marcus was writing something in a small notebook. He didn't look at her, nor did he seem to be in any hurry. Her composure annoyed her, as if he didn't need her services. She pulled the tray closer. "Would you like something to drink?" Marcus looked up, smiling slightly. "A glass of water, please. We'll start serving drinks in a few minutes." "Sir." The reply came out softly, but with a hint of coldness. She pushed the tray forward, stopped by another customer, and poured water. For a moment, She caught Lena's eyes following her. She thought, "This girl is too observant." When she returned, she found Marcus still sitting there. The glass of water had not yet reached him. He made no expression, but made another note in his notebook. This made Clara strangely uneasy. "Perhaps he thinks he is being slighted," she said to herself. "But it is not my fault. I'm only following the order of service." A vague feeling rose in her heart, a mixture of self-preservation and pride. Like someone had touched a wound she didn't want to remember. She remembered when she was 16. Her mother was yelled at in front of a crowd by a supermarket manager who mistook her for a thief. At that time, she stood by, biting her lip, promising herself that she would never let anyone underestimate her again. But it seems that when she tries to step up, she accidentally repeats the same thing to someone else. The plane shuddered slightly as it entered the wind. Clara staggered, quickly holding the tray. The glass tilted, a few drops spilling. Marcus tilted his head slightly, looking at her, his eyes not angry, just quiet. "Thank you," he said softly, as if it were no big deal. It was this calmness that made Clara feel like she was being scrutinized. She turned away quickly and whispered to Lena, "Don't let the customer control your emotions. Keep a professional image." Lena simply replied, "Yes, but I think he was just being polite." Clara remained silent and didn't answer. She pushed the tray of drinks to the back of the compartment, her heart heavy. Something was wrong, but she refused to admit it. The voice in her head echoed, familiar and firm. "Serve those who deserve it." She believed it, but the more she believed it, the further she drifted from the real reason she chose this profession, helping people feel comfortable while flying. Marcus pressed the call button again. The light came on. Clara looked, but pretended to be busy. Lena started to move, but Clara's eyes stopped her. "I'll handle it." But minutes passed, and no one came. Clara continued to arrange the trays, trying to act normal. Her heart was beating faster. For some reason, when she turned back, Marcus was still sitting there, unperturbed. He didn't press the button again. He just took notes. The light on his face made her feel a little uneasy. "Maybe I'm being a little too harsh," she thought, then quickly defended herself. But he kept staring. She pushed the tray forward and took a breath. "Once this flight is over, I'll forget about this." But deep inside, an uneasy feeling still lingered. Not because of Marcus, but because of herself. From the back seat, Lena watched the scene unfold. She saw the tension in Clara's shoulders and Marcus's strange silence. She sighed softly, feeling uneasy, as if something was about to happen. Marcus closed the notebook and put away his pen. He looked up at Clara, who was passing by, his smile still gentle. "Excuse me, can I have a glass of water?" Clara turned back, her voice small but firm. "I told you we would be here in a few minutes. Sir, please be patient." She continued walking, ignoring the eyes of several other passengers who were looking at her. Lena bit her lip, her hands clenched. The air in the cabin became thick. No one said anything, but everyone felt something was about to explode. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the window. He muttered, almost to himself, "Sometimes, just a drop of water can reflect the whole ocean." Outside, the sun was high in the sky, its light reflecting off the white clouds, blindingly bright. The flight continued, but no one in the cabin knew that. From that very moment, a real storm was forming, not outside, but right in the hearts of people. The plane was cruising at 32,000 feet. The eastern sun cast a soft white light over the cabin, illuminating the silent faces. It was so quiet in first class that you could hear the soft clink of glasses on metal trays. Clara Hughes pushed a serving tray down the aisle. Each movement practiced. Her smile, practiced 1,000 times, remained the same, friendly enough, but not too familiar. It was the professional smile of someone who knew her place. Marcus Ellington sat in seat 2A, his hands clasped together, his eyes still fixed on the window. The clouds and the long streaks of sunlight reflected on his face. His watch now read 37 a.m. He glanced at the tray of drinks that passed by. There were transparent glasses of water, the light reflecting off them, making them look like liquid glass. He pressed the call button lightly. The yellow light flashed. Clara stopped the tray and turned to look. "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" Her voice was soft, but a little cold. Marcus smiled slightly. His voice low, and even I would like a glass of water. "Thank you." Clara looked at him for a few seconds. She replied, "Yes, I am currently serving the customers in the first row. Please wait a few more minutes." "Okay." Marcus nodded, his eyes unchanged. She turned away and continued pouring water for passengers in seats 1B and 1C. When the tray was full, she carefully walked to row 3, then 4. She only passed seat 2A without stopping. Lena Tran, from behind, saw clearly. She hesitated for a few seconds, then whispered, "Sister Clara, there is seat 2A." Clara replied quickly, "I know. Wait a moment. Do things in order. Lena." Her voice was not loud, but firm. Lena pursed her lips, her eyes filled with confusion. What kind of order makes the first caller wait, she thought, but didn't say it out loud. Marcus remained seated. On the table, the leather notebook was open. He wrote a few lines in it. Initial response, selective delay, testing employee attitudes. The lines were neat and uncrossed. He wrote as if he were recording a scientific phenomenon, not a personal matter. Across the street, the passenger in seat 2B, a middle-aged white man in a striped shirt, was having his glass of wine filled. He glanced at Marcus, then turned to his wife and whispered, "Funny, he's been waiting for water for 10 minutes. The woman shrugged. "Maybe he's not supposed to be here." Marcus heard clearly, but he did not react. He just closed his eyes and breathed slowly, like someone practicing keeping his balance in midair. 10 minutes passed. Lena walked over, bent down, and asked softly, "Would you like me to get you some water?" Marcus chuckled and said in a low voice, "If you could. That would be great. Thank you." But at that moment, Clara turned back from the front of the compartment and caught sight of the scene. "Lena, I told you to wait for me to take care of that." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was so cold that the air felt thick. Lena hesitated. I just thought Clara interrupted. "No need to think. Follow the procedure." Then she turned to Marcus, a forced smile. "Sorry, sir. We will serve you right away." She set the tray down on the center table and poured a glass of water. Her hand shook slightly, and a few drops spilled onto the tray. She held the glass out to Marcus. Marcus looked at it, then said softly, "Thank you. May I ask, are you served by row, or by the time you request?" Clara froze for a moment. "According to procedure, sir." "What procedure?" he said calmly. "We give priority to first class and special guests. Which category do I fall into?" The question was as light as a breath. but it made her freeze. His gaze was not harsh, just calm. It was that calmness that made her uncomfortable. "You're a first-class passenger, too," she replied quickly. Marcus nodded. "Good. I just want to make sure everyone in this cabin gets the same service." The words were not loud, not harsh, but they made a few people around turn slightly. Clara felt her face heat up, her hands stiffen. "Of course, sir." She set the glass down on his desk, a little more forcefully than necessary. The glass made a soft clack on the table. Marcus continued smiling, as if he could not hear the irritation in the gesture. He picked up his glass, looking at the sparkling water. He said softly, almost in a whisper, "Thank you. Water is a test of patience." That statement, for some reason, made Clara feel uneasy. She turned away and continued her work, trying to ignore the feeling that something in her heart had been touched. Behind her, Lena continued to watch. In the white light of the cabin, she could see the conflict on Clara's face between pride and embarrassment. Marcus put down his glass of water, not drinking. He just observed her reaction and the reactions of those around him. In his notebook, he added, "Staff react defensively when questioned. Service culture needs to be overhauled at the grassroots level." He stopped writing and looked out the window. The clouds moved slowly, as if time itself were watching them. A moment later, Clara returned along the deck. As he passed Marcus, he smiled slightly. "How long have you been doing this job? About 10 years. Sir, 10 years is a long time. You must have met all sorts of people." "Yes," she replied. "Some are nice, some are a little more difficult, and you can usually tell which one is which by looking at them." She smiled slightly, trying to keep her composure. "That's the skill of this job." Marcus nodded. "Perhaps, but sometimes what you see doesn't tell you." She didn't answer. Something inside her stung a feeling like she was being peered into something deep inside that she didn't want to face. A slight tremor shook the cabin. A few passengers held onto the handrails. Clara quickly reassured them. "It's okay. Just a little turbulence." Marcus was silent, his eyes fixed straight ahead. In that moment, he felt the air around him change, not because of the altitude, but because of the heaviness that spread from a small encounter, as small as a glass of water, but much larger in meaning. Lena brought a blanket to another passenger. As she passed, she whispered to Clara, "I don't think he's trying to be difficult. He's just testing to see if I can see anything." Clara paused, then turned around. "Test." Lena smiled sadly. "I don't know, but sometimes people stay silent not because they're weak, but because they're observing." Clara didn't answer. She walked quickly forward, her heart pounding. Lena's words echoed in her head, along with Marcus's calm gaze. "In seat 2A." Marcus opened his phone and wrote a short note. "The challenge is not in the action, but in the reaction." He closed the book and took a sip of water, cold, clear, and light, but the taste a little bitter. Not because of the water, but because of what it had revealed. The plane was still flying, the clouds were still drifting, but from that moment on, no one in the cabin knew that they had just witnessed the beginning of an event that would change the entire Sky Vista Airline and the lives of the two people sitting in the front row. Lena Tran stood at the back of the cabin, a water bottle in her hand, her gaze fixed silently on the front row. She saw every movement, the way Marcus Ellington nodded his head in thanks, the way Clara Hughes tried to smile, but her hand tightened on the tray, and the puzzled looks of some passengers looking around. She had been doing this job for 4 years. During that time, she had met all kinds of passengers, nice people, difficult people, polite people, rude people, but never before had she felt the atmosphere in first class as heavy as it was today. There was no noise, no arguing, just a suffocating silence, a meaningful silence. Lena watched Marcus. He sat still, occasionally writing something in an old leather notebook. There was no anger, no irritation. She recognized it as the expression of someone who had faced similar situations so many times that he was calm. It was his calm that pained her. She thought of her parents. They left Vietnam for the United States when she was 7 years old, and worked tirelessly in nail salons for more than 20 years. She once witnessed her mother being scolded by a customer for choosing the wrong color of nail polish, even though her mother apologized and refunded the money. At that time, Lena just stood there, speechless. She carried the haunting silence of helplessness throughout her childhood. Now she finds herself in the same position, witnessing injustice and not knowing what to do. Clara pushed the tray back into the back compartment. "Lena, please get some napkins from the top shelf," she said coldly, emotionless. Lena nodded and went to the back cabinet. As she opened it, her hand stopped. Marcus's words echoed in her head. "We all deserve to be treated the same." She took a deep breath, feeling her heart beat faster. She wanted to do something, say something, but the rules, the fears about work, the evaluation, the superiors, everything was like a tight rope around her neck. She turned back and placed the towel on the tray. Clara didn't look at her and just said, "Make sure the back compartment is full. Don't worry about the small things." "A trivial matter," Lena repeated in her head, feeling the weight of the word. One person being treated differently. Could it be just a trivial matter? She glanced at Marcus. He turned slightly, his eyes looking out, as if watching the clouds. But Lena saw clearly there was something deep, sad in his eyes, as if he saw more than anyone else saw. The plane shook slightly. Clara went to check the cabin. As she passed Marcus, she whispered, "I hope you're comfortable." Marcus replied, "Comfort doesn't always come from the seat." You know, his voice was soft, but each word seemed to touch the air. Lena stood nearby, her heart sinking. She walked over and placed the tray of food on the table in the middle of the aisle. "Do you need anything else?" Marcus smiled. "No, thank you. You're very thoughtful." That simple sentence made Lena blush slightly. She bowed slightly, then stepped back, feeling a strange feeling, both proud and worried. Clara saw this scene. Her eyes turned cold. "Lena, I told you not to serve the guests in the front row. I just brought the tray over. Don't make excuses." Clara spoke softly, her voice stern, as if afraid someone else would hear. "If a guest complains, they won't blame me, they'll blame you." Lena bowed her head, biting her lip. "Yes, I understand." She walked to the back of the cabin, her hands shaken slightly, her eyes suddenly stung, from anger or sadness. She couldn't tell. Maybe both. From where she was, she could still see Marcus through the gap between the 2 rows of seats. He was writing in his notebook again. She wondered what he had written. Part of her wanted to know, but part of her was afraid, because she had a feeling that each line was recording something bigger than this flight. A male passenger in row 3B asked for water. Lena served it, still trying to keep a smile on her face, but in her head she heard her mother's voice. "When you stay silent about something wrong, You are saying it is right." She set down her tray and turned to look forward. Marcus was looking out, and Clara was talking to the passengers in row 1B, smiling brightly. The first-class cabin became cold, not because of the temperature, but because of the eyes that did not meet. Lena took a deep breath, took a few steps forward, and then stopped. She felt as if she were walking a thin line between right and wrong, between conscience and work. She dared not advance, nor could she retreat. Marcus tilted his head slightly, meeting her gaze. For a moment, they looked at each other. Words were needed. Just the look in her eyes was enough to tell Lena he knew she saw everything, and he didn't blame her. She bowed her head. A tear rolled down her cheek and landed on the back of her hand. She wiped it away quickly, afraid someone would see. Clara turned back and checked the luggage compartment. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." "Fine." "Are you sure?" Lena nodded. "Fine." Clara didn't ask any more questions. She left. But Lena knew clearly that no one in this compartment was truly okay. Not Marcus, not Clara, and certainly not her. The plane hit a gust of wind, and the scenery outside faded. Pale white light filled the cabin. Lena felt like she was in a hazy dream where everything slowed down, but every second was vivid. She thought that if someone were looking in from the outside, they would see just the usual first-class cabin, well-dressed people, trays of drinks and breakfast. But if they listened closely, they would sense something else: heavy breathing, averted eyes, and things left unsaid. Lena took a deep breath. 2 simple words echoed in her head. "Don't be quiet." She was about to step forward, but then stopped when she heard Clara say to the passengers, "Some people are hard to please, aren't they?" The words were soft, but enough to send a chill down Lena's spine. She knew exactly who the some people Clara was talking about. Marcus remained silent, as if he hadn't heard, but Lena noticed his hand tighten slightly on the notebook. It was a small reaction, but enough to make her heart clench. She knew she had just witnessed something wrong, and she knew if she kept quiet, she would carry it with her forever. In the dim light of the cabin, Lena stood still, looking towards the front row. This time, her eyes did not tremble. She might not say anything today, but she knew that when the time came, she would. Marcus raised his head, meeting her gaze once more. He nodded slightly, as if understanding what she was thinking. In midair, 2 strangers, one enduring, one witnessing, quietly shared something unspoken that the silence could not last forever. The plane continued to fly through the white clouds. The noon light filtered through the windows, bathing the first-class cabin in a dreamy light. Clara Hughes leaned against the flight deck, her checklist in hand. But her mind was distracted. She sensed something was wrong. Not a mechanical problem, not a passenger problem, but a pervasive unease in the air. From row 2A, Marcus Ellington opened his leather notebook again. He flipped through a few pages, wrote a few more notes, then gently placed his phone on the table. The screen lit up. The front camera pointed toward the aisle. No one noticed, or at least no one dared to ask. He was filming. Quietly. No noise. Lena saw it. She knew at once that he was not turning away in anger, but to preserve the truth. In the dim light, his eyes shone with something so steady and calm that it was frightening. Clara turned around, saw him looking up, and smiled wryly. "Mr. Ellington, do you need anything else?" "No, thank you," he replied softly. "I'm just jotting down a few thoughts. "Do you mind?" The question sounded harmless, but it sent a chill down Clara's spine. She didn't know why, but it felt like she was being stared at. "Of course, sir." She quickened her pace, trying to keep her composure. Marcus bent down and wrote more in his notebook. Note when power is abused in closed spaces. The silence of the victim is a mirror of the system. Lena stood nearby, feeling a lump in her throat. She looked around. A few passengers were whispering. A woman in row 1C glanced at Marcus and whispered, "That man is filming." Clara heard her and turned around, her voice rising. "Please, don't film in the cabin. It's airline policy." Marcus looked straight ahead, his eyes calm. "I understand the rules, but I also believe that rules should never be used to cover up unfair behavior." The air seemed to freeze. Everyone looked at them. Lena clenched her fists, her heart pounding. Clara tried to keep her voice calm. "I have not committed any unfair acts, sir." Marcus nodded slightly. "Then you do not need to worry." The answer, brief, was enough to make Clara feel numb all over. She turned away, her face burning. Anxiety crept into her every breath. Lena approached Marcus and whispered, "Sir, what are you coming back for?" Marcus looked at her, his eyes gentle but deep, to prove that even silence can say a lot. "Miss Lena." Lena bowed her head. She understood this was no longer a normal flight. Marcus continued riding, his hand steady. The people around, they see, they know, but they are silent, not because they agree, but because they are afraid. And it is that fear that feeds injustice. Up ahead, Clara tried to concentrate on her work. She served customers, smiling, but her every movement was stiff. The words, "What if he's someone important?" kept ringing in her head. It can't be. He looks so normal, she reassured herself. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. There was something in Marcus's eyes that she couldn't ignore. She remembered when he asked, "What kind am I?" The question rang out like a light, but deep, knife-cut. Lena walked over and said softly, "Sister Clara, don't you think we should apologize to him even if it was just a misunderstanding?" Clara turned around and said, "I didn't do anything wrong. Don't interfere in something that isn't your business. But you know very well," Lena said softly, "that all he asked for was a glass of water." Clara was silent. Then she replied, her voice choking, "If I apologize now, it would be tantamount to admitting that I was biased. And if you're not sorry, what are you holding on to?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. Clara did not answer. She turned away. In the dim light, her shadow stretched across the floor, a wobbly, weary shadow. Marcus remained silent. He knew the conversation. He had heard it all. There was no need to interrupt. He simply added one more line. "Sometimes, misplaced pride makes people lose something more precious. Humanity." The loudspeaker said, "Please fasten your seat belts. We are entering a zone of light turbulence." The plane shook. Marcus's glass of water on the table shook slightly, a few drops splashing out, breaking into tiny sparks. He picked up the towel, wiped gently, and said nothing. The action was small, but exuded an unusual amount of patience. Lena stood watching, feeling a surge of emotion. She understood that the man was not just enduring. He was teaching them all a lesson, with his composure. Clara sat in the flight attendant's seat, holding her seatbelt tightly. She looked around, seeing everyone's eyes on Marcus. Another silence fell, no longer tense, but expectant. In that moment, she felt naked. No longer the head stewardess, no longer the controller. She was just a human being exposed by her own actions. She took a deep breath, lowered her head, and said to herself, "If he really is someone, I made a big mistake." Marcus put away his phone, closed his notebook, and leaned his head back. He didn't need any more proof. He had seen what he needed to see. He had written what he needed to write. He closed his eyes and thought about the thousands of Sky Vista employees who worked there every day. People like Clara, like Lena, like himself. He had been one of them, and had been looked at with suspicion just because of the color of his skin. Now, sitting here, in mid-air, between the two worlds of the servant and the served, he understood. This war was not for revenge, but for change. The plane cleared the turbulence. The lights stabilized. Clara opened her eyes and saw Marcus still sitting there, his eyes half closed, as if meditating. Lena whispered to her, "Do you realize? Just one small action of yours can make others remember it for life." Clara was silent. She looked at her hand, the hand that had poured thousands of glasses of water. But today, just one glass felt as heavy as a stone. She turned away, avoiding Marcus's gaze, but she knew she would never forget that look, calm, deep, and full of questions. Outside, the sky gradually cleared. The plane continued toward Seattle, carrying people who were learning an unexpected lesson. And in seat 2A, the man remained seated, silent. But that silence became the strongest evidence of what he believed. The engine hummed softly and steadily, like the heartbeat of the cabin. Everyone was quiet, but the silence was no longer as peaceful as before. It was heavy, full of expectation, as if someone were about to say something that could no longer be held back. Marcus Ellington opened his eyes. The light reflected off his glasses, making his face look even calmer. He looked around. Some passengers avoided his eyes. Others looked back curiously. Lena stood nearby, holding a water bottle, her heart pounding. Clara Hughes was checking the back row of seats, trying to look calm, but she knew everyone was waiting to see what she and the man in seat 2A would say next. Marcus placed the leather notebook on the table. His voice was low and clear, loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. "I have a question for you. Chief Steward Hughes." Clara paused. His voice was not loud, but each word seemed to cut through the air. She turned, smiling awkwardly. "Yes, sir. Do you believe that every passenger here is served fairly?" There was a pause. Those sitting nearby held their breath. Lena clasped her hands. Clara replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course, sir. That is our policy." Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "So if someone is discriminated against just because of their appearance, it's against the rules, right?" Clara replied quickly, "Of course it is. And if an employee of the company acts in a way that makes a customer feel degraded, that person should be held responsible." Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Yes, I think so." Marcus smiled slightly. "Thank you," he said softly, but his voice was clear. "I just wanted to make sure you understood the rule you were breaking." The sentence fell into the cabin like a stone thrown into a flat lake. Waves spread out. Every gaze turned to look. Clara stiffened, her face pale. I didn't. Marcus raised his hand slightly, cutting her off. "I'm not accusing you. I'm just repeating what you just said. You believe in justice. So do I." He opened the leather notebook and flipped to the page that read, Selective Delayed Response. Staff attitude noted. He turned the phone screen back to show the video from a few minutes ago, the moment Clara refused to serve him. Her eyes cold and her gestures clearly biased. This is not to shame you. This is evidence of a bigger problem than you think. The whole compartment was silent. Lena bowed her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Clara stood there, speechless. Marcus looked around, his voice even. I don't film to hurt anyone. I film to show what happens every day, things that people call small, but make other people feel inferior, less than. A man in row 1B mumbled awkwardly, Maybe she didn't mean it, sir. Marcus turned, a small but sharp smile on his face. I believe so, but intentions don't erase consequences. Clara took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. I was just following procedure. I meant no harm. Marcus nodded. I know, but sometimes it's that not mean any harm that's the most dangerous, because it makes us not realize we're hurting someone. She was silent, head bowed. I used to be a baggage handler at this airport, he continued, his voice deepening. I used to be called the wrong name, asked to recheck my ticket, looked at suspiciously because of the color of my skin. I know what it feels like. It makes people smaller, not because they are weak, but because they are forced to be silent. A gasp came from somewhere in the cabin. Lena put her hand to her chest, tears falling silently. Marcus looked straight at Clara. Today, I'm not sitting here to retaliate. I just want you to see what I have seen, that sometimes just a glass of water can measure a person's heart. The air was thick and suffocating. Clara raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes red. I am sorry. Marcus nodded. Apologizing doesn't make you any weaker. It just makes you more real. He turned to Lena. Thank you for seeing. Lena choked. I just wish I were braver. You're brave enough, he said, his voice warm. You don't have to say it out loud. Just don't close your eyes. Clara stepped back, standing opposite him. Her voice trembled. Ellington, I'm sorry. I really didn't know. Marcus looked straight at her, his eyes as deep as water. You don't know who I am, and that's for the best, because if you did, you might act differently. And then, I'll never know the real you. There was a long pause. Then he added softly, I don't want you fired. I just want you to learn to see everyone as equal. No one deserves to be judged by the color of their skin, the way they dress, or where they sit. The words silenced the cabin. All eyes turned to Marcus, no longer with curiosity, but with awe. A female passenger in row 3A said softly, This world needs more people like you. Marcus chuckled. This world needs more people who listen. Ma'am. Clara bowed her head, tears falling continuously. Lena walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, sister. We're all studying. The captain announced that the plane was about to descend. The engine noise died down. The atmosphere in the cabin became calm, as if we had just walked through a storm that no one knew they were in. Marcus closed the notebook and put it in his pocket. He looked at no one else, just breathed a sigh of relief. He knew this flight had accomplished another mission, not of travel, but of awakening. When the plane touched down, Clara took the initiative to speak Mr. Ellington. Thank you for telling the truth, and I apologize, not just for today. He nodded. Thank you, Hughes. As long as you don't repeat it to anyone else today, that's enough. She nodded, her eyes still red. Lena stood behind her, smiling slightly, a smile both sad and relieved. The hatch opened, and the Seattle light poured in, warm and clear. Marcus stepped out, his gait composed, each step carrying the lesson he wanted to leave them and the world. No one on that flight knew that. Just a few days later, the short video Marcus recorded would go viral, sparking a larger conversation about prejudice and humanity. But for now, in the cabin, there was only a sense of peace, a real peace, not because of silence, but because people chose to speak up. The sound of the plane door opening was a soft click, but to Clara Hughes it felt like a sharp stab to the ear. Seattle air rushed in the damp smell of rain, cold wind, and the faint scent of coffee. Passengers began to leave the cabin one by one. Everyone greeted and smiled, as if trying to forget what had just happened. But no one really forgot. Marcus Ellington stood up last. He took his time, just grabbed his coat and a small suitcase. He walked over to Clara and stopped. "Thank you for the flight, Miss Hughes," he said, his voice low and warm. Clara bowed her head, not daring to look directly at him. "I look forward to seeing you again, but under better circumstances." Marcus smiled. "A gentle but deep smile. I look forward to that too." He walked out. His figure blended into the crowd at the station entrance, silent but full of weight. Lena watched, feeling strangely empty inside. She knew something big was beginning, something far beyond Flight 742. That afternoon, when Clara returned to the staff room, she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's eyes. She was about to reach for her phone to call her husband, but her finger stopped. The first message that appeared was from a colleague. "Did you see video from Flight 742 is all over the internet?" She was startled. Opening the link, she saw a picture of herself, a stern face, a cold voice refusing to serve a black man who asked for water. The clip was less than 3 minutes long. With a simple title, the man was denied a glass of water in first class. Comments below are rolling in. "What a shame. I can't believe this happened at Sky Vista. Who was that man? He was so calm." Clara felt the ground fall away from her. Her heart raced, her breath hitched. She hung up the phone, but the image lingered in her mind, her own voice. Marcus's eyes, his smile as he replied. What procedure? She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. No one in the room said anything. Everyone had watched. Meanwhile, on the top floor of Sky Vista's Seattle headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. The Vice President of Human Resources opened. "We are in a media crisis. The clip has gone viral. The company has been heavily criticized for discrimination." Another voice asked, "Who is the man in the clip?" The assistant stood up, his voice low but clear. "That is Mr. Marcus Ellington, General Director of Sky Vista Airlines." The room was silent, as if all the air had been sucked out. One blurted out, "Oh my God, Clara Hughes just refused water to the CEO." Another shook his head. "If this is an internal audit, we have completely failed." Marcus was in his private office on the 29th floor. He looked at the screen, replaying the video. No anger, no smile, just silence. He knew he didn't need to say anything. The truth spoke for itself. There was a knock on the door. Gabriela Santos, the firm's director of diversity and inclusion, walked in. "Marcus, I saw it. Are you sure you want the video to go viral?" He nodded. "Don't stop it. People need to see this, not to punish anyone, but to reflect on ourselves." Gabriella looked at him, her eyes a mixture of worry and admiration. "You are truly different, Marcus," he replied softly. "No, I was just lucky to have the opportunity to do exactly what I wanted others to do for me." She was silent. There was no anger in the man's eyes before her. There was only weariness and a quiet faith in humanity. Meanwhile, at home, Clara sat on the couch, her phone still lit. It was a notice from the company asking her to temporarily suspend work pending investigation. Her husband called out, "Clara, are you okay?" She smiled bitterly. "Are you okay? The whole world is watching me refuse a man asking for water. I think the word okay is no longer applicable to me." He was silent. After a while, he said, "You can apologize publicly. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is whether you dare to look back." Clara sat silently. She opened the cupboard and took out a small old wooden box. Inside was a photo of her mother, the woman who had been insulted at the supermarket years ago. She looked at it for a long time, tears streaming down her face. "You have become the person I feared most," she whispered. That night, the video surpassed 10 million views. News channels referred to it as a lesson in prejudice in the service industry. What makes this clip special is not that the person being discriminated against is the CEO, but because of his reaction, calm, humane, making people reflect on themselves, said a reporter. The next morning, Marcus entered the office early. Lena was waiting. She timidly stepped forward. "Mr. Ellington, I want to thank you. Without you, I probably would have remained silent forever." Marcus smiled gently. "Thank you, Lena. Sometimes people just need someone to dare to open their eyes, and you did that." She bowed her head, her voice trembling. "What about Miss Clara?" Marcus looked out the window, where thin rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds. "She will have to face the truth, but I don't want her to be destroyed. I want her to change." "Will you forgive?" Lena asked softly. Marcus nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It's the only way to truly make amends." A strange feeling arose in Lena's heart, both respect and emotion. She realized that this man was not just a CEO, but a person who had gone through pain and learned to turn pain into light. Elsewhere, Clara sat writing an email. Subject line, "Excuse me, from Clara Hughes, Chief Flight Attendant of Flight 742. She wrote slowly, each word trembling. "I can't take back my actions, but I can learn not to repeat them. I want to start over, not to save my career, but to become a better person." As she pressed send, tears fell onto the keyboard. She knew, for the first time in her life, she was truly honest with herself. That afternoon, Gabriela Santos walked into Marcus's office and whispered, "Clara just sent in an email asking to join a cognitive bias training program." She said she wanted to be an inspiration to people who were like her. Marcus looked out at the distant gray sky, a smile appearing on his face. "So, there is hope?" On the phone screen, a message appeared. Sky Vista Airlines announces the launch of the One Sky program, fair and compassionate training in aviation services. Marcus turned off the screen, leaned back in his chair, his eyes peaceful. He knew that all storms pass, but what remains is how people face each other afterward. In the early morning, the Seattle sky was covered with a thin layer of fog, the water droplets on the Sky Vista office windows reflecting the pale light. The city was still sleepy, only a few taxis gliding slowly on the rain-soaked streets. In his 29th floor suite, Marcus Ellington sat at his wooden desk, holding the fountain pen he always carried with him when he needed to write something important. He opened the old leather notebook that had accompanied him through his years of rising from the bottom. On a new page, he wrote a small title, "To Those Who Have Been Wrong." He paused, took a deep breath, and then began to write. "I am not writing this letter to recall mistakes, but to remind of opportunities. Every day, we step out into the world with an invisible layer of glass over our eyes. It is created by how we grew up, where we live, and who we meet. That layer of glass sometimes makes us see others unclearly, not because they are blurry, but because we have not yet wiped the dust off ourselves. I have been through that glass, and I know how it feels. But I also understand that no one is completely innocent in this, because everyone has moments when they themselves look at others wrongly." He raised his head and looked out at the hazy sky, across town, in a small apartment. Clara Hughes was also sitting at a desk, her laptop open. In front of her was a blank screen, the email box flashing with the words, "To all, staff Askavista, com." She watched the cursor blink and felt her heart pound. She had to take a deep breath every time she typed a letter. "I am Clara Hughes, the flight attendant in the video that went viral last week. I read thousands of hateful comments, hundreds of abusive messages, and I understand. I deserve the anger. But today, I don't want to justify myself. I just want to speak the truth. I let unconscious biases guide my actions. I believed I was following the right procedure, but in reality, I let pride cloud my compassion. I looked at that man, Mr. Marcus Ellington, as a normal passenger, and worse, I judged him by his appearance. Now, I realize the scariest thing is not that my mistake was recorded, but that if he had not been the CEO that day, I might never have realized my mistake." Clara stopped typing, tears falling onto the keyboard. She didn't know how many people would read it, or if they would forgive her. But she knew, for the first time, she had told the truth. Meanwhile, in the office, Marcus was still writing. "Forgiveness does not erase the consequences. It opens the way for change. I do not believe in punishment. I believe in education. Because if we only punish, we make people afraid, not make them understand. People do not need to be humbled to learn humility. They only need to be seen." He closed the pen and looked at the last line. A relief filled his chest. Not because he had won, but because he felt like he was truly helping someone out of the darkness. His phone vibrated, a text message from Gabriela Santos Marcus. Clara sent an email to apologize to the entire company. She also asked to join the training program and share her story. He smiled. "Thank you. Gabriela, let her do it. People deserve second chances." That afternoon, the Seattle sky cleared after several days of rain. Lena Tran was in the training room, watching a video recording of Clara's sharing session on the screen. Clara was no longer the proud chief flight attendant, but a humble, simple woman. "That day," Clara said hoarsely, "I refused a glass of water. But what I actually refused was a person's trust. I learned that you don't have to be mean to hurt someone. Just not listening is enough." The whole room was silent. Lena looked around and saw many people bowing their heads. She felt warm inside after the talk. Clara walked out of the room and met Marcus standing in the hallway. He looked at her and gave her a simple smile. "You said it well," she replied, her voice choking. I was just saying what I wish I had understood earlier." Marcus nodded. "It doesn't matter if we understand sooner or later, as long as we don't stop." The two stood there, silent for a few seconds. Outside the glass door, the last rays of sunlight shone in, casting a golden glow on the wall. Clara said softly, "Thank you for not destroying me." Marcus looked at her, his eyes gentle. "I don't want anyone to feel degraded, not even the person who hurt me. Because I was once in your position, misunderstood, judged, I don't want that cycle to continue." His voice was slow, but every word lingered in the air. Clara bowed her head, tears falling, but this time it was out of gratitude. A few days later, the press published the article Sky Vista Airlines launches One Sky program founded by CEO Marcus Ellington, aiming for equality and understanding in customer service. Below is a picture of Marcus and Clara standing on stage together, sharing about their journey. In an interview, Marcus said, "Nobody is perfect, but if every mistake becomes a lesson, it is no longer a stain, but a seed of change." Clara stood beside him, smiling slightly. She knew she would carry that lesson with her for the rest of her life, not to atone for her mistakes, but to live a better life. In the corner of the auditorium, Lena watched the two of them, her heart filled with trust. She remembered that flight, the moment when a glass of water became a mirror of the whole system, and she knew that sometimes the biggest changes don't come from big things, but from how people treat each other in the smallest things. Over the Seattle sky, a Sky Vista plane flew by, its silver wings reflecting the sunset. Inside, a new flight attendant smiled, placed a glass of water in front of the passenger, and said in a gentle voice, "Please enjoy your flight, sir." It is not just a gesture of service, but a promise, the promise of a world that listens and respects. 3 months after the Flight 742 incident, it was springtime in Seattle. The sky was a light blue, dotted with drifting clouds. At SeaTac International Airport, the Sky Vista Airlines check-in counter looked different. No more angry lines, no more hasty shouts or indifferent looks. The staff bowed to customers with genuine smiles. Behind them, a new sign hung, one sky, one heart. Marcus Ellington stood still, watching the people move. He was not wearing a suit, just a gray coat, holding a cup of coffee. Every time he saw a staff member helping someone, he nodded slightly, as if to acknowledge it in his heart. Next to him, Gabriela Santos held a chart of statistics. Customer satisfaction increased by 27% after the training program. Maybe one sky really touched people's hearts? Marcus smiled. I don't think the number is as important as how they treat each other. When people learn to look each other in the eye, everything else naturally changes. Gabriela nodded. You know, Marcus, I used to think changing a system that large was impossible, but you did it in the simplest way, starting with a glass of water. Marcus chuckled. It only takes one drop to create a ripple. That afternoon, Clara Hughes arrived at the Sky Vista office, carrying a folder and a calm gaze. She had just finished training at a call center in Denver. When she saw Marcus, she stopped. "Hello, Mr. Ellington," she said softly, but her voice was no longer trembling. "Hello? Clara, I hear you're being asked to speak at the aviation conference next week." "Yes, they want me to share the story of 742. Isn't that strange? Someone who was wrong is now being asked to talk about the right lesson." Marcus looked at her and smiled gently. "It's not strange. People who dare to admit their mistakes are the ones who truly have something to teach others. Clara bowed her head, her eyes glistening. I only wish my mother were alive to hear that. Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. She would be proud, because she raised someone who listened to her heart. The two walked through the hallway, where the walls were lined with pictures from flight attendants helping passengers, children smiling by the window, old people being helped with suitcases. Beneath each picture was a small line of text, "Make others feel seen." In the late afternoon, Marcus returned to his office. He looked out at the sky. Pale streaks of light stretched like silk. On the desk, there was a small envelope from Clara Hughes. He opened it. Inside was only a handwritten note, "Mr. Ellington. I used to think that listening was just about responding, but thanks to you, I learned that listening is about understanding. Every time I give someone a glass of water, I no longer see a glass of water, but a person. Thank you for not abandoning me in the middle of a storm of my own making. Sincerely, Clara." Marcus read slowly, each word sinking into his heart. He did not reply immediately, but folded the letter and placed it in an old leather notebook. Then he turned on his computer and wrote in his work diary, "Sometimes leadership is not about making the big decisions, but about choosing to be silent at the right time so that others can hear your voice." That evening, at home, Marcus sat by the window, a steaming cup of tea rising from his cup. Lena Tran video-chatted from New York, where she was attending a training session for new flight attendants. "Mr. Ellington, I was telling you a story in class," she said, smiling brightly. "Everyone fell silent when you said, 'It only takes one person to open their eyes.'" Marcus laughed. "Really? Did you tell them that you were that person?" Lena shook her head. "No. I just want them to believe that anyone can become a person who dares to see." The two of them laughed together. The laughter was simple, but there was something clear, as if the old wounds had melted into the air. A few weeks later, a national airline convention was held in Chicago. Hundreds of executives, flight attendants, and professionals attended. On stage, Clara Hughes stepped out, microphone in hand. The light fell on her face, now full of confidence. "3 months ago, I was a prime example of what not to do," she said, "but today, I want to talk about the person who changed the way I see the world. Below." Marcus sat in the front row. No one knew he was the CEO until Clara pointed at him. "He gave me a second chance, not because I deserved it, but because he believed I could become worthy." The whole audience applauded. Some people wiped away tears. If he had chosen anger, I would have lost everything. Clara continued, her voice choking, but he chose to listen. And because of that, I learned to listen to others. After the conference, Marcus walked out into the hallway, where the Chicago sky was glowing with the setting sun. Clara approached, smiling. "You know, I still carry that water bottle with me, the one from Flight 742. Yes, it reminds me that sometimes it only takes one small act to change a life." Marcus looked at her and smiled gently. "I also kept that old notebook. Every time I read it, I see that we are all learning a little bit every day." Outside, a plane flew by, its silver wings reflecting the afternoon sun. Clara looked up, her eyes shining with a new light, no longer self-conscious, no longer afraid. She said softly, "I think the sky is listening too." Marcus replied softly, "Yes, because humans have finally learned to speak with their hearts." And they were silent, looking at the vast sky. The sound of the plane gradually faded away, leaving behind a gentle echo, like the common heartbeat of people who understood each other. One summer morning, sunlight filtered through the trees on an Atlanta boulevard. In a small cafe, a group of young airline employees gathered around laptop screens. They were watching a video recording of Clara Hughes's speech at the Chicago conference. The curly-haired girl sitting in the middle of the group said, her voice filled with emotion, "I can't believe this is her." Before, everyone was afraid of Clara. The boy next to her nodded. "Look at her now. She speaks like a different person. Maybe this is her true self." On screen. Clara said the last sentence. "Look at people, not business cards. Listen with your heart, not just your ears." The group fell silent. Then the girl sighed. "I will remember that when I board my first flight." Across town, in a high school, a civics teacher showed a video of Marcus Ellington. He was talking to a group of young students. "I have been treated differently, and I have learned not to let bitterness consume me. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is the strength to finish something bad that someone else started." A brown-skinned student looked at the screen for a long time, then raised his hand and asked, "Sir, what if someone doesn't apologize?" Marcus smiled. "Then I can still choose not to hate them. Forgiveness doesn't require permission." Applause rang out in the classroom. The teacher looked at her students and saw the light in their eyes, the light of dawning awareness. The story of Flight 742 spread across the United States. Flight attendant training schools began adding cultural understanding and unconscious bias to their curriculum. Many other airlines called Sky Vista, asking for permission to adopt the One Sky model. In a meeting, Gabriela Santos read the report. As of today, more than 10,000 Sky Vista employees have completed the training course. The rate of complaints about service attitude has dropped below 5%. More than 600 employees have volunteered to join the Listening to Customers team. Marcus was silent, then said, "Nice numbers, but I want to hear the story." Gabriella understood, pulling out a handwritten letter. This is from a 70-year-old passenger in Texas. She read, "I used to think young people these days were cold, but last week, a Sky Vista flight attendant sat next to me on the flight, just to listen to me talk about my husband, who died last year. She said, 'You don't need to say anything, just listen to me.' When the plane landed, I cried, not because I was sad, but because I felt like I was still being heard. Thank you, Sky Vista, for teaching your staff that." The conference room was silent. Marcus placed his hand on his chest and said softly, "That's what I've been looking forward to the most. In the afternoon." Clara came to see Marcus. She brought with her a plan to expand One Sky into the community. "I want to take the program to schools and hospitals," she said. "Wherever there are people, there is a need to listen." Marcus looked at her with a warm gaze. "You're not just making amends. Clara, you're doing good." She smiled softly. "Maybe because I have been in the dark, I understand the value of light." In the evening, Marcus returned home and opened his old leather notebook. On the last page, he wrote a short line. "When people learn to listen to each other, the sky will no longer be divided." A light rain pattered outside the window. He closed his eyes and imagined his first day at the airport. His oily hands, his sweaty back, and the gaze of a supervisor who had made him feel small. He smiled because now he had turned the pain into something better. The following week, Lena Tran was transferred to the New York office to oversee the training program for new flight crews. Before leaving, she stopped by Marcus's office. "Mr. Ellington, I want to thank you. Without you, I might still think silence is the safest course." Marcus laughed. "Silence is only good when it helps others hear, but when it obscures the truth, it is fear." She nodded, her eyes sparkling. "I will remember your words." The day Lena left, the sky was blue. Planes were taking off one after another. In each one, there might be someone learning to see others with listening eyes. A year later, Sky Vista received the Airline of Humanity Award. When Marcus stepped up to the podium to receive the award, he didn't say much. He simply recounted the story of Flight 742, ending with a simple sentence: "A glass of water may quench your thirst, but a single act of kindness can soothe your heart." The whole audience stood up and applauded. In the crowd, Clara and Lena looked at each other, smiling brightly. After the ceremony, Marcus left the hall and walked down the long, yellow-lit hallway. A young employee ran up to him and shook his hand. "Mr. Ellington, thank you for your inspiration. I am of Haitian descent, and your story has made me want to apply for a job in the airline industry." Marcus took his hand and smiled. "Good. We need more people like you, not to prove anything, but to show up, to show others that we can be anywhere." The young man tearfully said, "I will try." As he left, Marcus looked up through the large glass window. A plane was leaving the runway, its lights shining brightly. He said softly to himself, "When people learn to see each other, every flight becomes a journey of healing." Outside, it was raining lightly, but in Marcus's eyes, the sky seemed brighter than ever. That night, Marcus Ellington sat alone in a small hotel room in Houston. Outside the window, the sky was clear and the stars were bright, like a memory. He had just attended the Sky Vista 30th anniversary celebration. When everyone left, he did not go to the celebration but called a car to go somewhere else, a very familiar place. It was the old cargo terminal at Bush Airport, where he had worked in his early 20s. Everything had changed. The iron gates had been repainted, and the loading dock was now automated. But the old paint was still there on the west corner where he had stood to rest during his night shifts. Marcus walked slowly, his hand lightly touching the cold wall. Memories rushed back like a slow-motion movie. The young man from that year, wearing a faded uniform, was pushing a cart loaded with heavy luggage. A white supervisor approached and said harshly, "Hey, be careful. These things cost more than your monthly salary." Young Marcus just kept quiet, his head bowed. He didn't respond, because he knew, at that moment, arguing wouldn't help. But when the man left, he looked up at the night sky, where the lights reflected off the gray clouds, and said to himself, "Someday, I'll be in a position where no one will have to endure this anymore." Now, standing in that very spot, he smiled, not bitterly, not proudly, just a sense of coming full circle. An old security guard walked over, holding a flashlight. "Excuse me, are you looking for someone?" Marcus nodded slightly. "I'm just going back to where I used to work." The security guard looked closely, then recognized, "Oh, you're Mr. Ellington, right, CEO of Sky Vista." Marcus smiled gently. "I used to be. Now I'm just a baggage handler here." They sat on the steps talking. The wind blew gently, carrying the smell of gasoline and the sound of planes taking off in the distance. Marcus asked, "Are there still many people working the night shift here?" The guard nodded. "Yes, but it's different now. Everyone is treated better. Did you know that Sky Vista just started a scholarship fund for the children of airline workers? Marcus nodded, his eyes slightly moist. I know. It's something I promised myself back in 1989. The guard smiled. You keep your promises for a long time. Marcus replied slowly, because there are promises that you can only keep when you forgive the place that hurt you. They sat still, looking out at the distant runway. A Sky Vista plane took off, its red lights flashing in the night. The guard said, the sky looks big up close, but it looks small from above. It's like the human heart. If you open it up, there's room for everyone. Marcus nodded. That's right. The sky only splits when we draw boundaries. The next morning, he visited a small school nearby where Sky Vista sponsored a children's library. The children rushed out to say hello. A brown-skinned boy ran up, his eyes shining Uncle Marcus. I read about you in a book. I want to be a pilot, too. Marcus smiled, sitting down at the boy's eye level. Very good. But before you become a pilot, learn to see everyone as equal, because the one who controls the sky must have an equal heart. The boy nodded vigorously. I promise. A young teacher approached and whispered, the kids love you. The story of Flight 742 is in the school's ethics book. Marcus smiled and said softly, I just hope they remember that everyone can make mistakes, but no one is defined by their mistakes. Late in the afternoon, he left school and walked alone along the airport tarmac. The loudspeaker rang out, Sky Vista 901 is about to depart for Seattle. Seattle, the city that had marked a turning point in his life. He stopped, looking at the silver plane parked on the runway. In that moment, old images appeared Clara's eyes that day, Lena's tears, and the moment he said, a glass of water can measure a person's heart. He suddenly smiled. All the pain of the past had now become something beautiful. Because without it, there would be no today. In the evening, he sat at a small cafe near the hotel and ordered a cup of black tea. On the table, an old leather notebook was open to the last page. He wrote, some pains don't go away, but they turn into light to show others the way. Forgiveness doesn't weaken us, it sets us free. As he put down his pen, the waitress's voice rang out. Ellington, may I ask you something, of course? Do you regret not letting them fire that waitress? Marcus looked at her, his eyes soft. No, because if I chose revenge, the story would stop there. But when I chose forgiveness, it flew further than any flight. The waitress was silent, then smiled. I think I understand. Thank you. The Houston night was quiet. Marcus went outside and looked up at the sky. The stars twinkled like 1,000 eyes, each eye that had once been invisible. Now, seeing, the sky is still the same, he said softly. Only now we know how to listen to it. The light reflected off his face, gentle and peaceful. An old chapter closed, not with applause, but with the peace of a healed soul. 3 years after he stepped down as CEO of Sky Vista, Marcus Ellington lives peacefully in a small house in the Portland suburbs. The house is nestled among old pine trees, covered in a thin white mist every morning. No more meetings, no more press conferences. He spends most of his time writing and growing flowers. In a small corner of the garden, he places a wooden plaque engraved with the words, when we listen, the sky will respond. That morning, he sat at his old wooden desk, on which was his familiar leather notebook. He opened a new page, and the first line he wrote was, a message to the sky. He stopped and looked out the window. Birds were singing. The wind was blowing through the leaves, and the morning sunlight was streaming into the room, a soft yellow breath. Marcus picked up his pen and began to write. To future generations. When you read these lines, the sky may be different. Planes will fly farther and faster. Humans will have traveled to other planets. But there is one thing I hope will remain humanity. Many years ago, I was rejected because of the color of my skin. I felt small and angry. But then I understood. Anger doesn't make the sky brighter. It just takes away my ability to fly. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It is choosing not to let the past hold you captive. And because of that, we are able to help others see themselves again. He put down his pen and took a deep breath. Each line carried a memory. Faces appeared again: Clara, Lena, Gabriella, the people who had accompanied him on his difficult journey. If someone hurts you, don't let that pain define you. Let it teach you how to be gentle with others. If you see someone being treated unfairly, don't turn away. No need to shout, just step forward and say, "I see you." Sometimes a look of sympathy can change someone's whole day, and sometimes a glass of water can start to change the world. Marcus chuckled, recalling the moment. Flight 742 had been over for nearly 10 years, but its echoes still lingered. Every time he went to the airport, someone would stop to greet him, smiling. "Ellington, I read your story." He always replied, "Thank you for listening." That afternoon, Lena Tran came to visit. She was now the training director of Sky Vista. Her hair neatly tied back, her face mature, but her eyes still as gentle as ever. "Mr. Ellington, the One Sky program is now in 12 countries," she said proudly. "They mention you in every course." Marcus smiled. "I just planted the seed. You guys are the ones who keep it growing." Lena looked at the notebook on the table. "Curious. What are you writing again?" Marcus replied softly. "A message to the sky. I want to leave a few things behind, in case I'm no longer here to tell them." She was silent, her eyes filled with tears. "You will still be here for a long time." Marcus smiled gently. "The sky is so big, everyone will have to fly away one day. What matters is what we leave behind." In the afternoon, after Lena left, he sat down to write again. If you work in the airline industry, remember the sky's not just a place to fly, but a place to learn to live together. If you are a passenger, remember the person serving you also has a long day, with fatigue that you do not see. Be kind, because no one loses anything by being kind. He paused and stared at the words for a long time. The afternoon sunlight shone on the paper, making the ink glow a deep bronze color. A gentle breeze blew by, causing a few flower petals from the garden to fall. He smiled and said softly to himself, "The sky is listening too." Late that night, Gabriella Santos called. Her voice was warm, but a little hoarse. "Marcus, the board would like to invite you to attend the 10th anniversary of One Sky in Seattle next month." He paused for a moment, then said, "I'm not sure I can go any further. But let Lena represent me. She understands that spirit better than anyone." Gabriella chuckled. She said, "Without you, she would never have had the courage to speak up." Marcus was silent, looking up at the night sky. He knew that sometimes the greatest teachers don't need to stand on a podium, but just walk quietly behind others. Before going to bed, he placed the leather notebook on the table and opened the old pages. The first page still had the words he had written many years ago. First observation, people respond faster to looks than to words. He laughed, and the last lesson, he whispered, is that people change when seen with the heart. The next morning, the neighbors did not see him in the garden as usual. When they entered, Marcus Ellington was sitting by the window, his eyes slightly closed, a gentle smile on his lips. Before him was an open notebook, the last page containing only one line. If you can't change the world, change the way you see one person. The news of his passing spread quickly, not as sad news, but as a gentle reminder. At Sky Vista headquarters, Lena stood on stage at the memorial service, reading his last letter. Everyone was silent. No one could hold back their tears. When she reached the last sentence, the audience stood up and applauded loudly, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. On the big screen, an image of Marcus appeared, bright eyes, gentle smile, and below it was a quote he loved: "When the sky listens, man will learn to fly." Outside, the sun was shining brightly. A Sky Vista plane took off, reflecting light like 1,000 tiny stars shining in the daytime. And somewhere high above, Marcus Ellington was probably smiling, peaceful, like a part of the very sky he taught people to listen to. The day of Marcus Ellington's funeral, the Portland sky was unusually clear, not a cloud in sight. Long shafts of sunlight fell on the small garden where the altar was set up, where Marcus had planted his favorite lavender. There was no elaborate ceremony, no mournful music, just the soft sound of the wind, of birds circling overhead. People sat around, not in neat rows but in a circle, as he had liked group meetings. Lena Tran stood near the small wooden table where the old leather notebook and the photo of him smiling gently were placed. She wore a black coat, her hair tied back, and her voice was soft but firm. He once said, "One day, when I leave, don't say I'm gone, say I'm flying." A hush fell. Many bowed their heads. Clara Hughes sat in the front row, her eyes red but her smile still there, the smile of someone who had been forgiven and learned to be kind. She stepped forward, holding a carefully folded piece of paper. 10 years ago, I did the stupidest thing of my life on Flight 742. But it was this man who turned that terrible moment into a turning point for me to become a different person. If you can hear me today, I just want to say, thank you for not leaving me in the middle of the storm. She was speechless, folded the paper, and placed it on the table. A light breeze blew by, and the paper fluttered slightly, as if someone had just nodded. After Clara, Gabriela Santos spoke. She maintained her usual calm demeanor, but her voice trembled slightly. Marcus didn't just change an airline, he changed the way we see each other. From that day on, Sky Vista was no longer just a company, it was a community, and that community was built on the values he left behind: listening, understanding, and respect. She paused, looked around, and smiled. He once told me, "I don't need a monument, I just need everyone to take a piece of good with them when they leave here." Today, I think, we have done that. The sound of light applause rang out, mixed with the sound of wind rustling through the pine branches. A group of young Sky Vista employees stood up and threw small strips of paper into the air, one by one. On each strip was a handwritten "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me to listen. Thank you for making me believe that people can change." The paper strips flew up, swirling in the wind, and then melted into the clear sky. Someone whispered, "It looks like a shower of stars." In the corner of the garden, a silver-haired woman quietly placed a bouquet of lavender. She was the mother of Raymond Harris, a man who had been discriminated against in a similar incident years earlier, and whom Marcus had helped mediate. She said softly, "Thank you, sir, for teaching my son that respect does not require hatred." The crowd fell silent. Lena looked up at the sky, tears streaming down her face. After the memorial service, everyone was invited to board a special flight, Sky Vista 742M, departing from Portland to Seattle. The final journey to scatter Marcus's ashes in the skies above where he began and ended his journey. On the plane, no one spoke loudly. The sound of the engine mingled with the wind outside. Lena sat in seat 2A, Marcus's old seat, on the table. She placed the leather notebook open to the last page. The words he left behind still felt warm with the writing. "If you can't change the world, change the way you see one person." She read each word in her mind, then gently placed her hand on it. Clara came from the back seat and placed a glass of water on the table. "For him," she said softly. The entire first-class cabin was silent. Everyone understood the meaning of that glass of water, a symbol of change, an apology, and a promise to continue. As the plane reached its mid-flight stop, Lena stood up, holding the small white porcelain urn. She opened the lid and tilted her hand. The ashes flew out, dissolving into the afternoon sunlight, swirling in the wind like thousands of sparkling silver dust particles. Clara whispered, "The sky has called him back." Lena closed her eyes, saying as if to herself, "And we will continue to fly." When the plane landed in Seattle, the sun was setting. The sunset washed over the runway, orange-yellow streaking across the gleaming steel wings. Lena stood by the window, her heart sinking. In that moment, she heard his voice somewhere, deep and warm. "Lena, don't forget, every flight is an opportunity to make someone believe they are valuable." She chuckled and whispered, "I promise." Back at the Sky Vista office, Gabriella announced a new decision: the One Sky program would be renamed the Ellington Initiative, in honor of the man who started it. But, she added, "We're not doing this to commemorate one person. We're doing this to remember that in everyone, there's a Marcus, the part that listens, understands, and forgives." Everyone clapped, no one cried, just peace spread. At the end of the day, Lena took the leather notebook back to Marcus's old office. She set it on the table next to the framed photograph of him looking out at the sky. Outside the window, the curtains were swaying in the wind, and light fell on the pages, making the writing seem to glow. She whispered, "Mr. Ellington, the heavens hear you," and, as an answer, the sound of a plane taken off echoed from afar, deep, strong, yet gentle, up above, among the clouds. Marcus Ellington must have been smiling. The sky that day was strangely blue, a blue that knew no human limits. 10 years after Marcus Ellington's passing, the aviation world is very different. But at any Sky Vista airport, one can still see a small sign hanging next to the check-in counter, the Ellington Initiative. Listen to fly. It's not just a slogan, it's a reminder that kindness can still exist in the most barren of places. At Seattle Airport, Lena Tran, now Vice President of Sky Vista, walks down a newly opened lobby. The glass walls are transparent, and light reflects off the floor like drifting clouds. In the middle of the lobby is a delicately carved steel statue of 2 hands holding a small airplane, with the words engraved below. dedicated to Marcus Ellington, the man who taught us to see each other. A group of visiting students were standing around the statue. The teacher pointed and said, "This is the founder of the One Sky program. Thanks to him, the American aviation industry changed the way people are trained." A dark-skinned boy standing in the middle of the group asked, "Ma'am, is he real?" She smiled. "Yes, he is." And his story begins with a glass of water. The group laughed, but then fell silent as she continued, when they got to the part where he didn't fire the person who had hurt him. He helped her change. Several of the children widened their eyes. The youngest boy said, "So he was strong in a way that didn't require yelling." The teacher nodded. "That's right. The greatest strength is choosing the right thing when everyone else wants to choose the easy thing." Lena stood nearby, listening to the whole story. She didn't interrupt, just smiled. In the sunlight streaming through the glass, her face was reflected next to Marcus's on the plaque. The two images overlapped, as if one generation followed the other without speaking. In the afternoon, she met with the regional directors via a large screen. Her voice was clear, soft but firm. "We're going to expand the Ellington initiative to 20 more countries, but I don't want it to be just behavioral training. I want it to touch the heart. Tell them his story in the language of each region. We are not just teaching rules, we are teaching people." Everyone nodded. Gabriella, now retired but still an advisor, looked at the screen and whispered, "Marcus would be proud." Lena smiled. "I think he's listening." That afternoon, she went to the seaside park where Sky Vista had set up a small memorial for the staff and passengers who had died. In the middle of the garden was a glass wall with the names of those honored for their acts of kindness. She read each line slowly: Raymond Harris, for inspiring reconciliation; Clara Hughes, for teaching the power of admitting mistakes; Lena Tran, for bringing the light of One Sky to the world. At the bottom is the name Marcus Ellington, and a short sentence: the one who chooses forgiveness over punishment. She stood still for a long time, the wind blowing, making the Sky Vista flag flutter. In the distance, a plane took off, flying slowly into the sunset sky. She whispered, "Mr. Ellington, the sky is still open." At the same time, in a small school in Texas, a 10-year-old girl was writing her essay. Today's assignment, my hero. She wrote, "My hero doesn't have a cape. He just sits on the plane and smiles. When people treat him badly, he doesn't get angry. He teaches them to be better people. I think he's the one who makes the sky kinder." The girl signed her name Ava Hughes. The name was familiar. Clara Hughes's granddaughter. Clara was now retired and taught soft skills to children. Whenever she told a story, she still mentioned Marcus, her eyes lighting up as if she were talking about an old friend who had changed her life. 2 years later, Lena received an invitation to speak at the United Nations, the theme leading with compassion. When she stepped up to the podium, she began with this sentence 10 years ago. "I was just a young flight attendant who witnessed a man being treated unfairly. I didn't have the courage to speak up, but that man didn't punish anyone. He chose to teach us how to look at ourselves, and today, I stand here because of him." The hall was silent. Lena recounted the journey of One Sky, of the Ellington Initiative, of flights that had become places to connect hearts. When she got to the part where Marcus wrote, "If you can't change the world, change the way you see one person," The applause was long and warm. In the auditorium, a young journalist wrote down the quote and posted it on social media. Within days, the quote had spread around the world, shared millions of times. People called it the Ellington quote, but Lena didn't care about the publicity. After her speech, she just stepped out onto the balcony and looked out at the purple evening sky. She whispered, "Mr. Ellington, you're still teaching us, even though you're far away." One summer night in Portland, a group of local school children held a stargazing event called The Sky Listens. They spread out mats on the grass and read aloud the acts of kindness they had done during the week I helped an old lady cross the street. I apologized to a friend for laughing when he fell. I gave a homeless person a bottle of water. The teacher smiled. "You know, it all started with a glass of water." The children laughed, then looked up at the starry sky. One said, "Is he looking at us?" "Not just looking," replied the teacher. "He is smiling." Years later, Sky Vista pilots were told that while flying between Atlanta and Seattle, they would occasionally hear a small signal, a very faint sound, like wind whispering through a radio. They jokingly called it the Ellington wave. No one could explain it, but everyone believed it was a greeting from someone who kept flying. The sky doesn't end, it just changes shape, like human love, still flying, still shining, just in a different place. The story of Elias Morgan is about more than just a flight or a first-class seat. It is a reminder that our worth is not determined by our appearance, status, or the approval of others. No matter what age or how many years we have been through, life presents us with choices to be silent or to speak up, to walk away or to be strong, to compromise or to stand up for what is right. Elias taught us that true power lies in the ability to stand up for what is right, even when the world is against us. That action not only changed his life, but also inspired, changed the culture around him, and opened up opportunities for others. In every right choice, we plant seeds of hope and spread kindness. Remember, every moment you act with kindness, listen sincerely, or stand up for justice is a building block for a better community, a better environment, a better world. Though small, its impact can create lasting change, just like Elias did on that fateful flight. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. If you found the lessons and emotions in the story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspirational stories. Together, we can create moments of change for ourselves, for our communities, and for the world.